middle of reorganising my library as promised. Why do you ask? Is it because the plant that everybody loves is missing? Or is it because of this disaster? Or this one? Maybe it's because of this one. Or is it because I have like 30% less hair than I had before? I will be taking no further questions at this time, thank you. Hi guys, it's Leanne, or what's left of me, and I am here today to bring you my first tops and bottoms video of 2021. If you're new here, tops and bottoms is the way that I wrap up the books that I read for you in the previous month by only talking about my absolutely favourite reads and my absolutely not so favourite reads. There's definitely a couple of those on this list, so move it along. Let's kick things off in a nice way, shall we? Let's talk about the first top that I had in 2021. It was in fact the book that I used to carry me between December and January, because I've discovered that if I stop reading everything, if I finish everything before the end of the year, I then get stuck in this weird neurotic behaviour where I'm like, oh, but the first book that I read in the year must be an amazing book, else it shall spell doom for the future year. No 5-star reads for me. So what I've started doing is having a transition book, a book that takes me from December to January, so that it doesn't have to carry the weight of all of my expectations for the whole year. This time that book was a memoir essay collection, which is not something that I read a lot of. Usually when I read memoirs, they are one long form memoir from one author, but this is a collection and I am so freaking glad that I read it. This is What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, 15 Writers Break the Silence, edited by Michelle Filgate, and it is a collection from a group of already published authors. Some of them you will probably recognise, like Carmen Maria Machado, and they are all talking about their experiences with their own mothers. I have a bit of an interesting perspective on motherhood. I myself am an adopted person, and although my adoption was not unsafe in any way, it was not necessarily a happy one all round, and I've had to work really hard with our relationship with my mum. We might not have been the people that we picked for each other, but we've scraped really hard over the years to make things better. And also I am somebody who has chosen not to have children, although I am technically clinically infertile. I would need help if I wanted to do that, and so I sit in that weird place where that decision has also partially been taken away from me. Think about motherhood, I think about it as kind of a kaleidoscopic thing. I don't think about it as like the two typical portrayals that you get. I'm sick of seeing those in media. I'm sick of seeing the extremes of like really unhappy or really happy and there being nothing in between. So I'm constantly picking up narratives that interrogate that experience a little bit further, and this book definitely does that. This collection is so varied. Some of them talk about being completely invalidated by their mother and how they spent their entire lives sort of scraping for their approval and then realising as an adult that that was something that had become almost pathological in their behaviour and all of their other relationships. There's a couple in here where minds have changed over years and the opportunities to mend bridges are no longer there because parents have passed away. But there are also, somewhat wonderfully, a couple of essays in here which talk about setting your parents adrift, casting them away from you, becoming completely estranged as a choice, as a piece of self-protection, or as a development of yourself. Getting to a point in your life where you realise that your parents are causing you more harm than they are good, and you're holding on to them because of some idea of what parenthood should be that you're never going to be able to fulfill for each other, and just saying that's not for me anymore. There's tremendous strength in those essays, but there's also such deep heartbreak. I will give a content warning that this collection does contain quite a few instances of sexual abuse in various different ways, and some of those sexual abuse situations are not advocated for. Some of the victims of that sexual abuse are never heard, and that's really difficult to confront as a reader. It's difficult to almost be in that moment with them and then to know that nobody was there. I honestly hate clickbaity publishing terms, but I kind of want to call this one a triumph. It's the thing that keeps coming back to mind when I think about it. And it's rare, I think, that as you're reading a book, you're realising that it's changing you. That's what we all want, I guess, from a bookish experience, that not just that it gives you like joy and entertainment, but also that it changes you as you're reading it. And that was definitely the experience that I had with this one. I could feel myself like picking old scabs and also kind of letting them heal over. I really, really love this collection. If you have even the vaguest interest in it, I say pick it up. Okay, so with every high, there must be an extreme low, and that is definitely the next book that I'm about to talk about, and my first bottom for the video. Before I get into the rant, I must first say thank you very much to my lovely, lovely patron, Stephen, who got this book for me. It was absolutely not your fault that it was so terrible. This is She Was the Storm by Cherie, Avritt, and this is a poetry collection. I almost wanted to say that in like inverted commas, a poetry collection. In my worst books of 2020 video, I talked about the fact that Instagram poetry was somehow like a dirty term. It was something that we shouldn't aspire to, that we shouldn't enjoy, that we should like say is a guilty pleasure. I don't really believe guilty pleasures exist either when it comes to reading. There are only pleasures. It's other people that are making you feel guilty about them, and you don't need to carry that. But my point there was that people were slating poetry like Amanda Lovelace's and Rupi Kaur's for being too direct, for not being structured enough, for not being maybe flowery enough, for not being literary enough, and also for being self-helpy. That's the other thing that people constantly say about Instagram poetry, that it's self-helpy and that because it's in such like little bite-sized chunks, it's really not worth anything. And I think that is just such a shit take. Poetry does not have to be unintelligible, literary or weird in order to be worth anything or worthy of being published. The reason that I have said all of this is because this book here was trying to be the exact same kind of primer to a sort of self-help collection of poetry that Amanda Lovelace did with this one, except it really did not land. It intensely did not land. And actually I could definitely see some validity in the whole like Instagram poetry criticisms when it comes to this collection, because A, it's tiny. I mean, the poems are all this big. In fact, some are much shorter than this. And B, they kind of feel like the kind of thing that you see on Instagram when you see a beautiful piece of artwork, but it will have like an uplifting quote like take 10 seconds to breathe today. I do that kind of art myself. I like it as a creative outlet, but I would by no means then take all of those one-liners and try and stick them into a poetry collection. There's absolutely no through line in this. There's no journey from the start to the end, and while that's okay for like a selected poetry collection where you might be reading something over like the course of an author's life, or you might be reading different poems from different authors all put together by an editor, I don't think that it works for an individual poetry collection. I feel like there has to be a line from start to finish. So I've just flipped through to a random page to try and find you an example, and literally this here on one page just says, never stop believing in yourself. Never forget your own value. Trying is never weakness. While all of those statements are absolutely and completely valid, they're not poems. They're affirmations. They're the kind of things that you buy as affirmation cards to like put next to your mirror and say to yourself 5 times in the morning to try and internalize it. They're not the kind of things that you put in a poetry collection. And I guess if you want to get even more technical about this, there is no structure on the page whatsoever. The poems don't talk to each other. There's nothing in the actual structure of the poem which gives it any sort of added meaning. So yeah, I not only don't recommend this as self-help poetry, I just don't recommend it at all. That being said, a poetry collection which I did very much enjoy and which didn't fit in this video was Helium, which does all of those things that I've just talked about with through line and structure and clever wordplay and, you know, poems that make your brain go poof. And I think you should read that one instead. Let's talk about another top, shall we, before the lighting once again changes. Can't set up studio lights because there is literally no floor space left in my entire library. Love that for me. The next top that I have got here here was absolutely a crowning achievement of my new way of doing my TBRs. The first book that I picked up to mood read took me in an entire deep dive that literally took the rest of the month. The book that I am talking about is Solitaire by Alice Oseman. This is a YA contemporary novel all about Tori. Tori is in her last year at high school and she really doesn't enjoy much about her life. She doesn't like reading, she doesn't like hanging out with friends, she doesn't like interacting with people, and she watches the same movies over and over again to try and artificially infuse her with the feelings that she thinks that she should have. At the start of this new year in her school, a new group of kids join and one of them attaches to her quite seriously. Michael Holden is just the most adorable bean. I love him so much. But he attaches to Tori and she realises that she's never voluntarily made a friendship before and she doesn't actually know how to make a friendship. The people that she's friends with are just people she's like coasted along with her entire life, and she kind of panics. And all of this is set to the backdrop of a website which has popped up. It is a blog called Solitaire. The URLs for it are posted all over the school one day, and then Solitaire starts performing pranks. But as time goes on, those pranks get more and more sinister until everybody realises that they're actually not that funny anymore, and also that they all seem to have something to do with Tori at the centre of them. This book was a complete surprise to me. I had previously read Heartstopper Volume 1, which is a story about Nick and Charlie. Charlie is Tori's younger brother, and this is like their love story and how they got together and, you know, coming out and negotiating friends and relationships when you're just realising who you are as a person. And Solitaire was the novel that they came from, so that's the actual reason that I wanted to pick this up in the first place. I wanted to know their origin story, and it turned out to be an amazing book in its own right. Nick and Charlie are such a tiny little part of it that I barely cared about them when they were on the page. I just wanted to know that Tori was going to be okay. This book is a really clever interrogation into depression and mental illness because Tori doesn't actually realise that she's suffering from it. She doesn't have the language to be able to explain the non-feeling inside her, the numbness, the void part. She doesn't know how to explain that she doesn't feel like everybody else. She just thinks that everybody else is an idiot and she's the only one that's aware of it. And I think looking back in our teens, anybody who has anxiety or depression or anything like that can totally recognise that, where you're sitting in your own bubble and you're thinking, I'm the only one who understands how all of this actually works. You people are still caught in the cotton. But throughout the book there's this rising sense that Tori is drowning, not just like under expectations and things like that, but as things start to go wrong for her, as she's forced to interact with people and she realises that she can't do it, as she's forced to look at the way that other people have relationships and boyfriends, etc., and that she doesn't know how to get into any of those situations. The bricks start coming down from the wall and the water starts pouring in and she starts to get deeper and deeper because she is realising that there might actually be something wrong. There's great discussions in this book about being the witness to somebody who has mental illness and trying to be there for them and trying to be their friend when that is like a really difficult thing, because quite a lot of time people with depression don't want everybody to be there to help them, and so it's really difficult to maintain a friendship or a relationship with somebody who is just by nature of the illness quite self-involved. And I just really loved watching Tori realise that she didn't have to be on her own. I love this book so very much, but because of that, because I then read the origin book, I of course went back on to read Heartstopper, and then I did volume like 1, 2 and 3, and then I went on to This Winter, which is a Christmas novella that takes place mid-Solitaire, I think, and then Nick and Charlie, which is a Nick and Charlie novella which takes place when Nick is heading to university and leaving Charlie, who's a year younger, behind at school. And I am just completely in love and devoted to Alice Oseman's universe now. I have quite a few of her other books on my shelves, thank God. I'm trying to collect them all, although I shall have to wait till my book buying ban is finished. Why did I pick this year to do a book buying ban? I don't know. But anyway, I had Loveless on my shelf and I have picked that for my February TBR. And I believe that all of the books that Alice Oseman has written are all in the same universe, in that some characters do pop up in other books, although although they're not the focus, and that makes me so happy. That's the thing in romance where you have a friend group and you follow a novel for each person that I absolutely love. So yeah, there's my, that was the top, but it was more than one top, it was many tops. It was just Alice Oseman. She was just the top. She was amazing. I love her. So apparently I'm just crapping all over things written in verse or poetry in this video, because the next book that is an absolute bottom and was such a disappointment, I cannot tell you, was Here Is the Beehive, I think, by Sarah Crossan. It is over there in the unhaul pile, but it's under several books because I may or may not have threw things on top of it, so I didn't have to look at it anymore and feel disappointed. Sarah Crossan is more typically known as a YA contemporary author, and the first book that I ever read from her was Moonrise, which is this amazing, like, super emotive book about a young teen whose brother is on death row, and about the time where they get the phone call to tell them that their execution date has come through to the actual execution night. It's a deep dive into feeling, and the actual book is a masterclass in writing in verse. It's amazing. It made me feel all the things. It completely destroyed me, and it made me devoted to picking up all of her other books. So when I discovered that Sarah Crossan was bringing out her first adult novel, I pre-ordered it at the end of 2020 to get it in before my book buying ban started, and it arrived, and I immediately put it on my TBR for January because it was just so high up in my head, and it was awful. There's just no other way to put it. I absolutely hated this book. So essentially this book is about a woman called Anna. At the beginning of this novel we learn that Anna is in a committed relationship with a guy called Connor, but it is a completely secret relationship. They have been having an affair for 3 years. Connor has a wife and kids and doesn't plan to leave them, and Anna has an entire life that exists separately from Connor. None of her friends know that Connor is actually a person. They don't know that she's dating, they don't know anything about it. There's only one other person who knows about their relationship, and it's one of Connor's friends. At the beginning of this novel, Anna receives a telephone call that tells her that Connor is dead. She was in fact Connor's lawyer. That is how they met. She drew up his last will and testament, and the phone call that she receives is from his wife telling her that she needs information about what happens with the will now that he has passed away. It sounds like an absolutely mind-blowing premise. When you say it like that, it's like, oh my god, I've been dropped right in at the start of the action when all of the chips are going to fall, and then nothing happens. It never takes off. It's completely one note. The emotion goes nowhere. We're on this just one flatline journey through this entire book. I felt nothing, and it was such a shock to come from a book like Moonrise and then go back to this one where I had felt so many ups and downs and highs and lows with Moonrise, and this one just managed to evoke nothing except for, once again, why are these people even together? It felt so much more like a domestic thriller than it did a literary fiction contemporary novel, because it was the exact same vibe that I get in thrillers and domestic thrillers, where the entire book is about why the couple don't get on, and about how they want to destroy each other, or about how they're passively like living with each other but they actually has started to hate each other years before. But I always go into those books thinking, why were you two together in the first place? You don't even seem to like each other. You don't have any of the same hobbies, and if you're making each other that miserable, just leave. It is actually that simple in some cases. You can just leave. There's one scene in this novel in particular which just really pissed me off and put like a horrible taste in my mouth. Anna begs the one friend who actually knew about them, who was obviously Connor's friend, to meet up for lunch to like talk about Connor, talk about their relationship. And when they're in that meeting, she says to him, why would he never leave his wife? And this like middle-aged, average, very comfortable in his unhappy marriage himself, white man, turns around to her and is like, well, his wife is just one of those women. She's just one of those women you would never leave, Anna. You would never leave her. Ever. And I was like, what kind of manic pixie dream girl shit are we now in, that it's like, she's a different type of woman from you, Anna. She's not the type of woman that you walk out on. Like, What kind of world are we in where we're still publishing novels which fundamentally are like setting women up against each other from a man's point of view, written by a woman? So as you can tell, I had a lot of passionate negative feelings about this book. I do not recommend it. I did not enjoy it at all. I will go back and read more of Sarah Crossan's YA novels because I feel like there is a difference in tone between the two, but I don't think I will ever pick up any more of her adult novels because no. And then finally, let's end this entire wrap up on a high. I want to talk about the absolute wonder that was Cinderella is Dead by Kalynn Bayron. When this came out, it came out to such fanfare and it so completely deserves it. I am so happy that for some reason this book survived my hype train blackouts that I have, where I'm just like, oh, I'm so excited for that book, oh wait, so is everybody else, never mind, I'll put it on my shelf and never read it. Somehow this book managed to like swerve that entirely, and I'm so glad that it did, because I would be really upset if I hadn't read this. Well, I wouldn't know if I hadn't read this unless I was in some kind of weird time paradox, but you get my meaning. This is technically a fantasy book, although it's kind of real world adjacent in the same way that Beauty and the Beast is kind of real world adjacent, and it kind of takes place in an alternate historical France. In this world, the Cinderella story as we know it took place 200 years before. So there was a beautiful scullery maid who became a princess, there were evil stepsisters, there was a pumpkin, there was glass slippers, there was a fairy godmother, all of those things existed. But now 200 years later, the Cinderella story has morphed into a story of control. All of the women in this province are required to attend a choosing ceremony, a ball like the ball that Cinderella went to, wherein they will essentially be paraded for all of the available men of the town, who, by the way, can choose to attend their first ball at any time they like. They can go when they're 16, they can go when they're 18, or they can go when they're 74, and they're still all eligible to choose any woman that they like, all of whom are 16 or up. So that extreme skeeve factor is constantly hanging over all of the characters in this novel right from the very beginning. But Sophia is swiftly realising that all of the girls around her also want pretty dresses. They don't want to dress up in what she does, which is our ideal is a pair of pants with like 2 legs and pockets, just like the rest of us. And her ideal choice would be the girl that she has loved for several years. She feels like she has already chosen a person who she would like to spend the rest of her life with, but that is not acceptable in the province that they are in. Women do not marry or fall in love with women, and men do not marry or fall in love with men. I was shocked by how much action was packed into such a small space in this book. I never felt like I was rushing, which I think is kind of a gift, to manage to pack in so many events but never make me feel breathless. We very quickly meet Sophia, see the situation that she's in, see all of the other women who are in all different shapes of peril, and then we're thrown into this first choosing ball. And needless to say, at this first choosing ball, everything goes wrong. Everything that could possibly go wrong happens, and Sophia is forced to flee, and that's where we really pick up her story, where she starts to unpick the Cinderella myth. There's a massive twist surrounding the fact that Charming and Cinderella did not have children, and so the monarchs are hand chosen by the reigning monarch before they die, and that was so clever. I absolutely loved that. When I discovered what was actually happening, it was just like, and it doesn't hold back on how completely bleak the circumstances are for all of the women in this world. I also feel that sometimes books that have that kind of commentary then actually forget to give the characters any kind of agency. But Sophia did a few really surprising things in this that I did not expect, some completely off the wall things, and I loved that. There were so many women in this book who were empowered and existing in this world where Sophia just didn't know that they were. She didn't know there was an alternative because her mother had never explored that alternative herself. But there were these women who were out there forging their own paths, and when she finds them, I also loved all of the ways in which this novel was hella queer. It made me really, really happy. Although there is a discussion in this book about how being on the LGBTQIA++++ spectrum is completely forbidden and it just doesn't exist, there's no counter discussion wherein Sophia has to talk herself out of thinking that it's disgusting, and I love that. I think it was really important the way that this book did that. It didn't hand the reader any kind of shame about feeling that way. It made it perfectly clear that the world was wrong and corrupt. Sophia was always perfectly happy about the way that she felt. She's perfectly comfortable in it and believed in it. It's just that she wanted to be able to feel that out loud, and I think that was so important. So yeah, as you can tell, I am deeply passionate about the things that this book did. I will push this book so much this year, I can absolutely tell. And some of these books may already be on my best books of 2021 list. Also, some of these books might be on my worst books of 2021 list. You win some, you lose some. So that's it, guys. That was everything for my first tops and bottoms for 2021. Hey, we got here. We're in one piece. Ish. Let's not speak too soon. I still have the rest of this library to do, and then that video to edit. So as always, guys, if you have read any of the books that I've talked about today, please let me know about it below. Did you love the things that I love? Did you hate the things that I hate? Do you disagree with me? I like opinions, so leave them all in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. It helps very much to reach other people who might like this video. And if you are new, please consider subscribing so that you can be guaranteed to get more of my opinions in your feed. And if you hit the bell icon, you'll know immediately when they're in your feed. You can like drop everything to be salty with me. How amazing is that? I will speak to you guys very soon. Bye! Why am I doing this to myself? I do not like physical labour, and I do not like mess, and I do not like not knowing where my books are. Everything is bad. Can somebody else come do it for me, please?